Chapter 1. Dust in the Age of Dinosaurs. One might think dinosaurs had little to do with dust, but this would be a mistake. Dinosaurs, while large and fearsome, walked upon dirt. Their movements created wind. Wind lifted dust. Thus, dust circulated. When dinosaurs died, they became dust. This process took millions of years, but the result was the same. Fossilized evidence shows layers of sediment, much of which is made up of compacted dust. Paleontologists often find these layers deeply fascinating, the public less so. Nonetheless, each layer of dust tells a story. Sometimes it's a story of volcanic eruption, other times it's a story of climate change, but more often it's a story of dust simply sitting there for an extended period. Chapter 2. Human discovery of dust. It is not known exactly when humans first noticed dust, but it is likely they did not find it interesting. Early humans lived in caves. Caves are dusty. Therefore, early humans were familiar with dust, though they had no words for it. When languages developed, the concept of dust was formalized. Various ancient languages have words for dust, some more poetic than others. The ancient Sumerians, for example, referred to dust metaphorically as the substance to which humans return. This symbolic association did not improve dust's image. In ancient Egypt, dust was a nuisance. Many scrolls were lost to the ravages of time and dust. Priests and scribes often had to clean tablets and shelves, though their tools were rudimentary. There is evidence of primitive dusting rituals in some cultures, though they are seldom studied in detail because of their extreme unremarkableness. Chapter 3. Mesopotamian dust. The cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, was not exempt from the omnipresence of dust. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, dust accumulated steadily due to seasonal changes, wind currents, and human foot traffic. Clay tablets uncovered in the region suggest that scribes often had to clean dust off their workspaces, lest the fine particles obscure cuneiform inscriptions. While these efforts were largely unrecorded, the presence of dust is implied by the frequency of smudged tablets and broken styluses. The cities of Uruk, Ur, and Babylon experienced frequent dust storms, especially during periods of drought. Farmers attempting to cultivate barley and wheat had to contend with topsoil displacement, a direct result of dust. Archaeological evidence of ancient brooms carved from palm fronds has been discovered, indicating that dust management, while not a prioritized science, was nonetheless a daily concern. Walls and floors of ziggurats were swept to avoid slipping on loose dust. Chapter 4. The formation of dust in the universe. It all began over 13.8 billion years ago, when the universe as we know it was formed in the event commonly referred to as the Big Bang. While the Big Bang itself was arguably not boring, what followed was a very gradual and uneventful accumulation of matter. Among this matter were tiny particles, microscopic, barely distinguishable, and most importantly, very dry. These were the first cosmic dust particles. Cosmic dust, not to be confused with space rocks, is small. Very small. Some particles are as small as 0.1 micrometers. These particles floated aimlessly in the vacuum of space, occasionally colliding with one another and sticking together. Sometimes they didn't stick together, and they simply floated apart. This happened for billions of years. As time passed, stars formed. When some of those stars died, they exploded in supernovae. These explosions, though violent and visually spectacular if observed from a safe distance, had a rather consistent outcome: more dust. This dust was hot at first, but then cooled down and floated about. It joined the previous dust in its noble mission of existing and floating. Chapter 5. Dust and early planetary systems. Eventually, over hundreds of millions of years, some of this dust coalesced to form the planets. This process is known as accretion, which is essentially a very slow gathering of dust and rock into slightly larger dust and rock. The early Earth was bombarded with dust, not just any dust, but ancient interstellar dust. Some of this dust melted into the planet. Some of it remained on the surface. Some of it continued to float around the solar system, taking its time to settle. Dust on Earth had a slightly different experience compared to space dust. Earth had gravity, Earth had weather. These were perfect conditions for new types of dust, such as volcanic ash, crushed rocks, and eventually organic dust. But at this stage, dust was still mostly geological. No one was around to complain about it or sweep it under a rug. That would change. Chapter 6: Egyptian Dust and Preservation. In Egypt, dust played a double role. On one hand, it was a constant irritant. On the other, it contributed to the preservation of mummies and papyri. The dry, dusty climate prevented microbial activity, allowing corpses to remain relatively intact for millennia. Ironically, while dust in the air caused sneezing among scribes and laborers, it also preserved the very records of their sneezes. Dust in tombs was also ceremonially significant. When tombs were sealed, any dust within was considered sacred and not to be disturbed. Some modern historians have taken samples of tomb dust, studying its composition to determine the construction materials used. These studies are long, involve particle analysis, and often yield little actionable insight, yet they persist. The daily life of ancient Egyptians involved much sweeping. Wealthy households employed dust removers, servants whose primary task was to fan and sweep surfaces. It is estimated that the average Egyptian living near the Nile encountered dust 6 to 8 times per hour. This, however, is only a projection. Chapter 7: Greek Philosophers and Dust. In classical Greece, there is no record of Plato or Aristotle writing specifically about dust. However, given their interest in elements, it is likely they would have considered dust a mixture of earth and air. The Stoics believed everything had a purpose, including dust. While these beliefs are abstract, it is evident from preserved texts that dust frequently interfered with scroll storage, leading to occasional deterioration of philosophical manuscripts. Public forums, such as the Agora, were unpaved and thus dusty. When citizens gathered to listen to orators, they likely kicked up dust in significant quantities. No system of dust suppression was ever implemented. Historians agree this was not due to neglect, but to an absence of awareness about particulate control. Chapter 8: Roman Dust Infrastructure. The Romans, known for their infrastructure, made slight advances in dust mitigation. Their famed roads, constructed with gravel and stone, reduced but did not eliminate dust. Chariots, especially in cities like Rome and Pompeii, generated dust clouds that settled into household entrances, bathhouses, and aqueducts. Roman engineers sometimes poured water over streets to suppress dust, a method rediscovered and still used at construction sites today. This was especially common during parades or public events, as excessive dust would have distracted from civic pride. Romans had dust-related words. Pulvis referred to common dust, while pulvis redivivus meant metaphorically returning to dust after death. This concept aligned with their funerary practices, where ashes and bone fragments, not strictly dust but similar, were stored in urns. Chapter 9: Monastic Dust Discipline. In the monasteries of medieval Europe, cleanliness was considered next to godliness, but only in symbolic terms. The practical implications of dust were, for the most part, tolerated rather than combated. Monks copied manuscripts in candlelit scriptoria, where soot and dust mixed on surfaces to create a fine film that frequently needed to be brushed off with cloth. This task was monotonous and performed in silence, thus aligning with monastic values. Dust in these environments was made up primarily of parchment scraps, textile fibers, and degraded ink. Some monks noted the dust in their marginalia. These notes, translated centuries later, included such lines as, "Too much dust. May the Lord preserve this page." Some monasteries used goose feathers, not for writing, but as cleaning devices. These primitive dusters were ineffective, but symbolic. Dust collected from sacred texts was sometimes stored and believed to have divine properties, although no records indicate its usage beyond mere reverence. Chapter 10: Dust and Castles. Medieval castles were not dust-free fortresses of grandeur. Their vast stone halls trapped airborne particles. Rushes on the floor, intended for comfort, quickly became dust reservoirs. When replaced, they released puffs of built-up detritus. Servants swept these rushes aside with brooms made of twigs, which themselves broke down into dust over time. The tapestries that lined walls did little to block drafts and much to collect dust. Some nobles blamed dust for coughing fits, unaware of the connection between chronic exposure to to fine particulate matter and respiratory illness. However, one lord in northern France is known to have banned hay indoors for its insidious softness, a euphemism historians believe referred to how it concealed dust. Chapter 11. Urban dust and marketplaces. Medieval towns were unpaved, noisy and dirty. Horses pulled carts across cobblestones or bare earth, stirring clouds of dust that mixed with dung, charcoal, flour and general grime. Bakers' shops were particularly dusty, as flour, ash from ovens and foot traffic combined to produce complex airborne mixtures. The exact composition of this dust is unknown, but scholars agree it was unpleasant. Markets dealt with dust by doing nothing. The prevailing wisdom was that a good wind would blow it away. Occasionally, market organizers would lay wet straw to reduce airborne particles, but this created mud, which later dried and became dust again. Chapter 12. Scientific noticing of dust. In the 16th century, as lenses improved and microscopes were invented, dust finally received attention from intellectuals. Antony van Leeuwenhoek peered through his rudimentary microscope and noted particles that had previously gone unnoticed. Some of these particles were living organisms. Others were just specks of inorganic matter. Dust became both a curiosity and a contaminant. Scholars learned that dust could distort experiments, ruin alchemical attempts, and obscure lenses. Leonardo da Vinci once attempted to design a self-cleaning workshop. He failed. Dust remained. In homes of the wealthy, feather dusters were upgraded to include peacock feathers. These were no more effective than goose, but offered greater prestige. Chapter 13. Dust in literature and art. Shakespeare occasionally referenced dust. In Hamlet he writes, "Alexander died, Alexander was buried, Alexander returneth to dust." This line was less about the physical substance and more about mortality, but it nonetheless acknowledged dust's omnipresence. Paintings of the Renaissance often depicted clean interiors, but in reality dust covered frescoes soon after they dried. Artists frequently had to clean dust from pigments. Oil painting especially attracted airborne particles that stuck to surfaces during the drying period. Paintings left to dry in corners emerged with minute textures caused not by brush, but by atmospheric accumulation. These textures were not celebrated. Chapter 14. Dust and domestic life in the 1600s. As furniture became more intricate, dust found more places to settle. Carved headboards, ornate bookshelves, and detailed moldings created niches where dust could live undisturbed for weeks. Servants were tasked with removing it, often using cloths dampened with vinegar. This method cleaned surfaces but left a smell that lingered for days. Houses of this period used coal for heating. This increased indoor dust levels substantially. Chimneys helped somewhat, but particles escaped into the room. The idea of dust being dangerous was still centuries away. For now, it was merely inconvenient. Chapter 15. Colonial dust colonization brought with it the spread of dust, both literally and metaphorically. Ships that transported goods also transported fine dirt from one continent to another. This unintentional dust exchange altered local ecologies in subtle and largely ignored ways. British colonial outposts noted dust accumulation in travel logs. Officers complained of dusty tents in India, dusty roads in Africa, and dusty windstorms in Australia. No formal solution was ever deployed. Dust was simply added to the list of natural inconveniences. In many colonial homes, elaborate dust covers were placed on furniture during absences. These were usually white and revealed every speck of dust that landed. Cleaning them involved shaking them outdoors, where the dust returned to the environment to be blown back inside later. Chapter 16. Dust in the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution changed the nature of dust. It became darker, heavier, and more lethal. Factories emitted coal dust, textile fibers, and metallic particles into the air. Workers inhaled these daily. At the time, this was attributed to general uncleanliness, or bad air, but not specifically to dust. Children working in textile mills often crawled under machinery to clean dust buildup. These jobs were dangerous and tedious. The dust caused coughing, which was dismissed as common. It wasn't until much later that conditions like mill fever were traced back to constant dust exposure. Inventors during this time experimented with mechanical dust collectors. James B. Duston, no relation to dust itself, designed a rotating fan system in 1852 intended to capture airborne particles. It failed due to frequent clogging by dust. Chapter 17. Victorian Dust Obsession. In Victorian England, dust became symbolic of moral decay. Manuals such as Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management emphasized the removal of dust as a sign of moral uprightness. Dust-free homes were believed to reflect dust-free souls. Maids were instructed to clean under beds, behind curtains, and atop wardrobes daily. New tools emerged: the carpet beater, the horsehair brush, and the damp tea towel. Still, dust persisted. Newspapers even published editorials on urban dust, linking it to sin and foreign influence. One article from 1874, titled "Dust, the Silent Invader," warned that failure to combat dust was tantamount to social collapse. It was not widely read. Chapter 18. Dust Bowl, a dust event. In the 1930s, the American Midwest experienced what is arguably the most famous dust-related event in modern history: the Dust Bowl. Caused by a combination of poor agricultural practices, drought, and wind erosion. This event led to the displacement of thousands and raised awareness of the sheer scale of dust's power. Soil turned to dust, crops failed. Dust entered homes, lungs, and dinner plates. Wet sheets were hung over windows. Families swept dust off tables only to see it return in minutes. Diaries from the time contain riveting passages like, "Dust again today, couldn't see the fence, ate with eyes shut." Despite its dramatic implications, the Dust Bowl was still, fundamentally, about dust doing what it always does: moving. The US government responded by planting windbreaks and promoting no-till farming. This was the first time dust directly influenced national policy. It was not the last. Chapter 19. Urbanization and dust. As cities grew, dust diversified. In urban environments, dust was no longer just dead skin and dirt. It included rubber particles from tires, pollution from factories, ash from cigarettes, and debris from construction. Apartment dwellers developed dust routines. Furniture polish became common. Dusting became a ritual of modern cleanliness, involving doilies, sprays, and disposable cloths. Dust allergies rose. Scientists studied dust mites. By mid-century, entire labs were dedicated to dust research. This research was, of course, dry reading. Journal titles like "The Temporal Deposition Rate of Household Dust in Controlled Domestic Environments" became academic staples. Results varied, but one truth held constant: dust was everywhere. Chapter 20. Dust in Film and Fiction. Dust entered the narrative space of cinema and literature in ways both subtle and obvious. Westerns used dust as a symbol of ruggedness. Characters often walked into towns kicking up clouds. In the good, the bad, and the ugly, dust was practically a character. Science fiction and dystopian stories leaned into dust for atmosphere. In Blade Runner, dust combined with smoke to obscure vision, symbolism, and plot. In Mad Max, dust storms became metaphors for societal collapse. Fantasy novels, too, embraced dust. In Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, dust became a metaphysical substance representing consciousness. This was perhaps the only time dust received such philosophical prominence in mainstream fiction. Chapter 21. Dust in music and advertising songs, like "Dust in the Wind" by Kansas, reminded listeners of mortality. The repeated lyric, "All we are is dust in the wind," resonated with millions, despite the fact that actual dust has no awareness, ambition, or memory. Meanwhile, vacuum cleaner ads declared war on dust. 1960s commercials often portrayed dust as an invisible menace attacking children, furniture, and pets. "Don't let dust win" became a battle cry. Animated dust particles were drawn with angry eyebrows to represent their threat. Despite the drama, no song or advertisement could escape one fact: dust itself remained passive, indifferent, and omnipresent. Chapter 22. Mechanical dust removal. The first motorized vacuum cleaner was patented in the early 1900s. These machines were bulky, loud, and had names like the Dust Banisher or Electro San. Early models required 2 people to operate. one to push and one to crank. The 1930s saw the rise of household vacuums. These devices fundamentally changed the battle against dust. Suction replaced sweeping. Carpet cleaning became a weekly, then daily activity. Vacuum bag technology evolved. HEPA filters emerged to trap finer particles. Bagless models entered in the late 20th century, and arguments erupted online over which system was superior. Forums debated airflow rates and filter materials. Dust quietly remained neutral. Chapter 23. Cultural integration vacuums became symbols of modern domestic pride. Some were chrome-plated, others pastel. Marketing emphasized ease and elegance. One ad read, "She'll love you for it, no more dusty corners." This sentiment was never confirmed by surveys. Roombas arrived in the early 2000s. These robotic vacuums wandered rooms semi-randomly, often ignoring entire dust patches. Nonetheless, they were embraced as progress. The idea that a machine could fight dust while humans watched TV marked a cultural milestone. By the 2010s, vacuums had Wi-Fi. You could track your home's dust coverage on an app. Few people did. Chapter 24. Cosmic dust revisited. With the advent of space exploration, dust left the Earth once more, at least as a concept. Lunar dust proved problematic during the Apollo missions. It clung to suits, scratched visors, and caused astronauts sneezing. Samples were brought back to Earth and analyzed for decades. Meanwhile, interstellar dust became a focus of astrophysics. Satellites measured cosmic particles. Research papers detailed their role in star formation and planetary rings. Conferences featured 30-minute talks titled, "On the Consistency of Submicron Dust Grains in Outer Nebula Clouds." Attendees nodded solemnly. None of this changed the fact that even in space, dust's core behavior remained. It floated. Chapter 25. Martian dust and future concerns. The Mars rovers encountered significant dust. Solar panels were blocked, cameras were obscured. Dust devils, mini whirlwinds, frequently rearranged Martian dirt, adding a random element to exploration. Engineers designed dust-resistant suits for future missions. These involved magnetic shielding and special fabrics. Despite their efforts, dust remained the top environmental hazard listed for Martian colonization. It got into hinges, it scratched optics, it refused to cooperate. Back on Earth, people imagined Mars dust as red and alien. In reality, it was chemically boring, composed of iron oxides and silicates, not unlike some deserts in Nevada. Chapter 26. Dust as metaphor. Dust has long symbolized impermanence. Religions refer to it as humanity's origin and destination. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust is recited at funerals. Yet for most people, dust is neither ash nor memory. It's just something to wipe off a shelf. Still, philosophers occasionally engaged with dust. Heidegger mentioned dust in passing while discussing being. Camus never wrote about dust directly, but one imagines he would have considered it absurd. Kierkegaard perhaps ignored it completely. In Eastern traditions, Zen koans occasionally reference dust. When the dust settles, what remains? The answer, generally, is silence. Chapter 27. The persistence of dust. Dust's true power lies not in its appearance, its nuisance, or its symbolism, but in its persistence. It is inevitable. It forms, reforms, and travels across space and time. It gathers where it is not wanted and remains where it is unnoticed. You can vacuum it, you can sweep it, you can ignore it. But dust will return. It doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't require meaning. It merely exists. That, perhaps, is the most boring yet profound truth. Dust abides. Chapter 28. Discovery of dust mites. It wasn't until the late 1960s that scientists confirmed what some had long suspected. Dust was not simply inert matter. It was, in fact, a thriving ecosystem. The main culprit? The dust mite. Microscopic, translucent, and legless, dust mites feed on flakes of human skin. A typical mattress can harbor thousands, perhaps millions. Dust mite discovery was met with alarm, but not panic. Researchers named species like Dermatophagoides terranicinus, which translates loosely to skin-eating mite of the wingless variety. This name did not increase public affection. Efforts to reduce mites involved vacuuming, washing bedding in hot water, and using plastic pillow covers. These strategies were tedious, often only partially effective, and widely ignored. Chapter 29: Dust and Respiratory Illness. The link between dust and asthma was formally established in the 1970s. Epidemiological studies showed higher incidence of respiratory issues in homes with carpeting, heavy drapes, and minimal ventilation. Dust acted as a carrier for allergens, mold spores, and pet dander. Doctors recommended patients remove sources of dust. This vague instruction led to minimal lifestyle changes. Air purifiers became common in middle-class homes. HEPA filters promised relief. Tests confirmed partial improvement. Despite all this, no cure for dust allergies was discovered. Antihistamines offered temporary relief. Nasal sprays did the same. In medical journals, dust remained a known irritant. It was neither blamed nor exonerated. Chapter 30: Literary appearances of dust has made consistent appearances in literature, often tied to death, decay, and memory. In T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, he writes, "I will show you fear in a handful of dust." Critics interpreted this as a commentary on modern emptiness. The dust in question, though symbolic, was still just dust. Emily Dickinson penned, "Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me, the carriage, held but just ourselves, and immortality." Later, she adds, "The horses' heads were toward eternity." Though dust isn't mentioned explicitly, its presence is implied in the silence and stillness she describes. Poets rarely praised dust. Few have admired its texture or marveled at its ubiquity. Its literary value lies mostly in what it isn't. Life. Chapter 31: Dust as Forgetfulness. Authors occasionally use dust as a metaphor for the forgotten. Old books gathering dust, childhood memories lost in the dust of time, or ideas abandoned like dust in the attic. In these instances, dust is not evil, just ignored. Historians also write about dusty archives. This is not metaphor. Many archives are dusty. Pages crumble under fingertips. The dust of long-dead paper rises into the reader's lungs. Some wear masks, others do not. Despite its presence in stories, dust remains a background character, never quite central, never quite absent. Chapter 32: The Emergence of Digital Dust. In the 21st century, a new form of dust emerged, not made of skin or sand, but bits and bytes. Digital dust refers to small data fragments left behind by online activity. Cookies, logs, metadata. Invisible, non-physical, but just as persistent. Cybersecurity experts began using the term in the early 2000s. They warned of how one's digital dust could be collected, analyzed, and monetized. Every search, every click, every scroll was another particle in a cloud of behavior. Users ignored these warnings. Dust was boring in real life. It was doubly boring online. Chapter 33: Memory, Deletion, and Trace. Deleting a file doesn't destroy it. Like sweeping dust under a rug, it's still there. Hard drives retain echoes, bits of data scattered across platters. Forensic experts retrieve these fragments. Lost drafts, half-written emails, old passwords, all buried in digital dust. Philosophers began to wonder, is forgetting even possible anymore? If the internet remembers everything, is the absence of dust now more disturbing than its presence? Companies sold software to clean your digital footprint. None worked perfectly. As with real dust, you could remove some, but never all. Chapter 34: The industrial response factories, labs, and clean rooms led the charge in dust elimination. Electronics manufacturing required particle-free zones. Intel's chip factories operated at Class 1 cleanroom levels, no more than 1 dust particle per cubic meter. This was enforced through air showers, bunny suits, and filters. Cleanroom engineers wrote entire manuals on dust trajectories. Diagrams charted airflow like topographic maps. Workflows were timed to minimize dust agitation. One 1984 training video titled "Understanding the Behavior of Dust" remains the most boring instructional ever produced. Still, chips failed, devices overheated, dust was suspected but never confessed. Chapter 35. Consumer-grade innovation. Meanwhile, consumer dust removal advanced more slowly. Handheld vacuums emerged, promising power and portability. Dusters came in retractable forms. Electrostatic cloths entered homes with slogans like "Traps dust, doesn't spread it." Some vacuums began talking, others used lasers. Still, the core task, moving dust from one place to another, remained unchanged. In Japan, a company tested an ultrasonic dust loosener that made dust vibrate off surfaces. The product failed commercially. It produced a high-pitched noise, unpleasant to dogs and humans alike. No silver bullet for dust was found. People settled for containment. Chapter 36. Saharan dust and ocean fertility. The Sahara Desert, world's largest source of dust, sends 400 million tons of particles across the Atlantic each year. Satellites captured the movement of these massive clouds, tracking them from Africa to the Americas. Iron-rich Saharan dust fertilizes the Amazon rainforest. Without it, nutrient levels drop. Scientists called this an ecological paradox, the world's greenest region fed by one of its driest. Despite this significance, public interest in these patterns remained low. News headlines read, "Dust plume crosses ocean," then disappeared. Chapter 37. Dust and climate models. Dust affects the climate in subtle ways. It reflects sunlight, it absorbs heat, it influences cloud formation. Climate scientists modeled dust in global simulations, but acknowledged that it introduced uncertainty. Dust does not behave consistently. In polar regions, dust darkens snow, increasing melt. In arid regions, dust cools surfaces by scattering light. In urban centers, it binds with pollutants, forming new chemical compounds with names like secondary organic aerosols. Despite these roles, dust is rarely discussed in public climate discourse. Carbon, methane, and plastic grab attention. Dust just waits. Chapter 38. Dust cleaning as industry. Dust removal, once a private task, became a booming business in the late 20th century. Cleaning services offered dusting as a premium package, sometimes charging extra for deep dust extraction. Companies branded themselves with sterile names like Dustbusters Incorporated or Particulate Solutions. Corporate offices began tracking cleanliness metrics. Janitorial teams filled out forms verifying dust mitigation efforts. Some sectors, especially tech and pharmaceuticals, required daily reports on dust levels in microns per cubic meter. No one enjoyed this work. Few aspired to dust management, yet the business grew. Chapter 39. Dust testing services. By the 2010s, companies offered home dust analysis. For a modest fee, they would examine the dust in your living room and email you a report detailing mold spores, skin cells, plant pollen, and synthetic fibers. These services promised health insights. Most delivered mild anxiety. A 2017 study showed that 94% of homes contain flame retardants, microplastics, and trace metals in dust. Clients often responded by purchasing more air filters. Dust testing kits became gifts. One tagline read, "Know your home, know your dust." Sales were adequate. Chapter 40. Dust as a chronometer. In archaeology, dust becomes a clock. The more dust, the older the layer, assuming no one cleaned. Sedimentologists measure dust deposits to track historical climates. Layers of loess, wind-blown silt, indicate past winds and droughts. In homes, dust also marks time. A dusty object is not recent. An untouched surface, covered in layers, implies absence. Dust provides no specific dates, but a vague chronology of neglect. Some art restorers study dust distribution to authenticate paintings. They distinguish between old dust and staged dust. Forgers sometimes apply artificial dust. Too evenly, experts can tell. Chapter 41. Dust in historical narratives. Historical accounts sometimes begin with dust. The dust of war, the dust of revolution, the dust of decline. Metaphor aside, real dust often attended these events. Ancient battlefields generated it. Collapsed buildings released it. Horse hooves pounded it. Historians rarely study literal dust. but they acknowledge its presence. In the fall of the Berlin Wall, for instance, dust clung to fallen concrete. In the ruins of post-war Europe, children played in the dust of what was once infrastructure. Every era produces its own dust, composed of its materials, movements, and collapse. Chapter 42. Dust in exhibits. Surprisingly, some museums have attempted to feature dust. The Museum of Dust, an online conceptual art project, collected imagined specimens of dust from around the world. Dust from dreams, dust from forgotten places, even dust from the future. In Germany, one temporary exhibit titled Hausstaub, House Dust, displayed jars of dust from historical homes. The collection received mixed reviews. One critic wrote, "It is difficult to remain engaged with particles. Most physical museums avoid real dust. It damages artifacts. Conservators go to great lengths to prevent it, using air curtains, positive pressure, and soft brushes. Irony abounds. Museums fight dust to preserve the past created by it." Chapter 43. Private dust collections. There are individuals who collect dust. One man in Ohio preserved dust samples from each of his residences over 40 years. His labels include 1989 studio apartment 4th floor and 2003 storage unit after fire. These collections are not publicized. They are private rituals of memory. Their motivations remain obscure. Dust from famous locations, like the moon, resides in labs under strict control. Lunar dust samples from the Apollo missions are studied, catalogued, and weighed in milligrams. One sample was accidentally auctioned in 2017 before being returned to NASA. Dust, it turns out, can have monetary value. Chapter 44. Symbolic interpretations of dust. Psychologists have occasionally interpreted dreams involving dust. Freud did not write directly on dust, but followers in the Jungian tradition associated it with neglect, suppressed memory, or aging. One patient described a recurring dream of choking on dust in an attic, interpreted as a repressed longing for clarity. In literature, dusty dreams often feature lost homes, old letters, forgotten corridors. The dust here represents time, distance, and absence. Rarely does it represent cleanliness, efficiency, or joy. Children's books use dust sparingly. Animated films often portray dust as cute, e.g. My Neighbor Totoro's soot sprites, but real children are less enchanted when cleaning. Chapter 45. Dust and mental health. Researchers have found links between clutter, dust, and anxiety. In environments filled with dust, cortisol levels rise. Whether this is due to visual chaos, breathing difficulty, or subconscious associations is unclear. Dust is also tied to grief. Empty rooms, left untouched after a loved one passes, accumulate dust. The act of cleaning that dust can be both painful and therapeutic. Therapists sometimes recommend rituals of gentle cleaning as a form of closure. No one dreams of dusting, yet everyone does it. Chapter 46. Smart homes versus dust. Modern smart homes include dust sensors. These devices measure particulate levels and alert users via smartphone notifications. Air quality dropping. Consider ventilation. Some models suggest specific windows to open. Robot vacuums now map dust density. They learn which corners gather more, which rugs shed faster. Algorithms optimize cleaning paths. Users review heat maps of dust. No one shares these. The dream of a dust-free home persists, but reality insists otherwise. Even clean rooms need cleaning. Even sealed homes collect. Dust adapts. Chapter 47. Extraterrestrial dust frontiers. Looking forward, dust is expected to remain a major obstacle in space exploration. NASA's Artemis missions to the Moon must manage abrasive lunar dust. Its jagged particles damage seals and electronics. On Mars, dust may one day be used to make bricks. Researchers propose baking it into structural components. Martian dustcrete could become a construction material. The irony is not lost. We may build new homes from the same nuisance we escape. On Earth, Martian dust becomes symbolic. In labs, people examine it under microscopes, imagining distant places, forgetting that similar dust exists in their vents. Chapter 48. Eternal dust. In the end, dust will remain. Long after books rot, hard drives crash, and cities fall, dust will be there. In wind, in silence, in corners no one will remember to clean. A speck of dust may survive centuries, moving from one surface to another. A grain may outlive empires. It has before. Dust does not evolve. It does not learn. It accumulates. It waits. Chapter 49. Sacred Dust. In nearly all major world religions, dust occupies a symbolic position. In Christianity, the phrase, "For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return," appears in Genesis. This line is often quoted at funerals to remind the living of mortality. Dust here represents the humble beginning and inevitable end of all flesh. In Islam, dust also plays a vital role. The Quran references creation from sounding clay, from mud molded into shape. Islamic tradition permits tayammum, the ritual use of clean dust or earth for purification when water is unavailable, elevating dust to a spiritual cleansing agent. Hindu rituals occasionally involve ashes and dust from sacred fires. In Buddhism, the dusty path is sometimes metaphorical, a symbol of ignorance or suffering to be swept away through mindfulness. The Zen phrase, "wipe the dust from your mirror," speaks not to the physical act, but the clarity of awareness. Thus, dust serves as a bridge between the material and the spiritual. Chapter 50. Pilgrimage. Dust travelers on sacred journeys, pilgrims, often return covered in dust. In medieval times, this dust was seen as holy. Garments covered in the dust of a long journey were considered proof of devotion. In some cases, relics included fragments of earth or dust from holy sites. There are even records of pilgrims bottling dust and selling it. Labels read, "Dust from the path to Santiago," or "Sands from the Mount of Olives." While authenticity was debatable, the symbolic weight remained strong. In modern tourism, such practices continue in modified form. Moon dust necklaces. Holy Land sand pendants. Dust commodified, yet still revered. Chapter 51. Dust as metadata. The digital age has redefined dust. On the internet, dust can refer to minor data, cached files, orphaned code fragments, obsolete documents. Software engineers call this digital cruft. It slows systems, bloats storage, and resists deletion. Old websites, abandoned forums, and unindexed pages gather digital dust. They sit idle, untouched, but still online. The Wayback Machine preserves many dusty corners of the internet where blinking cursors and forgotten guestbooks remain. This dust has no smell, no texture, but it lingers. Chapter 52. Social media and the dust of identity. Inactive accounts become dust ghosts, a profile untouched since 2011, still online. Friends tag a name that no longer replies. Birthday reminders arrive for the long departed. Social networks retain this data indefinitely. Dusty memories, photos of events no one remembers, comments from users long inactive. These fragments are called social dust by some researchers, digital residue of once lively interaction. Some argue this is beautiful, others call it digital hoarding. The platforms say nothing. Chapter 53, Idioms across cultures. Language is dusty, or at least it contains dust. Common idioms include bite the dust, to die or fail, dust yourself off, to recover from a failure, leave in the dust, to surpass or abandon someone, collecting dust, unused or forgotten. These idioms appear across cultures. In Japanese, the phrase dust motsumo moreba yama ni naru means even dust amassed becomes a mountain, implying the power of tiny efforts. In French, retomber comme un soufflé, fall like a soufflé, is often translated metaphorically as collapsing into dust. Dust, it seems, is universally unimpressive, and yet universal. Chapter 54. Literal misunderstandings. Children often misinterpret idioms. One child reportedly believed bite the dust meant licking the ground. Another thought dust yourself off was advice to apply powder. Language evolves. Idioms fall out of use. New phrases may arise, but dust remains embedded in the syntax of cautionary tales and metaphors of futility. Someday, delete the cache may replace wipe off the dust. Both suggest renewal. Both imply build-up. Chapter 55. training models on dusty data. Modern AI systems are trained on vast datasets. Within those are forgotten blog posts, old forum replies, broken hyperlinks, dust of the digital realm. This material contributes little but still exists. Model trainers attempt to remove low-value content. This is called data cleaning. Ironically, much of this cleaning removes the internet's dustiest and most human corners. Awkward phrasing, obsolete software help pages, abandoned webcomics. AI becomes more refined, less dusty, but perhaps also less real. Chapter 56. AI describing dust. When prompted, AI can describe dust in great detail. It can generate metaphors, simulate allergies, or list 19 types of dust found in a basement. But it has never sneezed. It has never wiped a shelf. An AI can generate an image of dust. It can model airflow. But it has no visceral experience. Dust exists only in its training data. Still, as AI writes essays, like this one, the dust of human thought carries through. The imperfect, meandering, repetitive tendencies. The desire to explain what needs no explanation. Dust, perhaps, is not a flaw. It's our fingerprint. Chapter 57. Dust as the final metaphor. Dust is the smallest possible reminder that things existed. It is what remains after reduction, time, and neglect. Not quite gone, not quite something. Philosophers call this the residue principle. Everything leaves something behind. A moment leaves a feeling. A structure leaves dust. As we archive our lives, digitally, spiritually, materially, we leave trails. Dust is the default, the minimum, the irreducible. What doesn't matter eventually dusts. What matters also dusts. Chapter 58. The final sweep. When the last light leaves a room, dust settles. It does not ask for applause, it does not need notice. It is the quiet aftermath of everything. Perhaps in some distant future, on a ship adrift between stars, a technician will brush off a control panel. The dust will be older than the Earth, and they won't even think about it. Dust will remain, unwanted, unnoticed, undefeated. And it will never, ever be interesting.